I'm George Curtis. Welcome to It's Your Law. Each week it's my privilege to bring guests that teach all of us about the law. Sometimes they're judges, sometimes they're prosecutors, defense attorneys, personal injury attorneys, scholars, professors. We don't call too many professors because we've only got a half-hour program. But we get a lot of people that can teach us something that we should know about our great country. What's wrong with the law? What can be made better? Who's being protected? And who's really being damaged because the law isn't working the way it's supposed to. Today we have guests on the latter subject. We have guests that are experts in immigrants and immigration law. There are very few people, not enough people, who are taking care of our immigrants and protecting them from deportation and being abused and mistreated. We're fortunate that we have a couple of lawyers in this area who are experts, and our first guest is Eloisa Christopher. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're a lawyer.
I am.
You don't look like a lawyer.
Thank you. Yes.
How long have you been a lawyer?
Since 2001.
And what kind of law do you practice?
Immigration, criminal law.
Who do you practice with?
I actually practice with my husband, Mark Christopher.
Well, that is really high risk, isn't it?
It's fun sometimes.
All right. Well, I think that's absolutely wonderful. Explain what immigration law entails.
Okay. Immigration law entails assisting families to obtain legal status in this country, perhaps helping mitigate certain issues with them that they come across, even though they might be legal permanent residents. And the ultimate cherry on the top is helping them become U.S. citizens.
Our country has a welcoming tradition. It has always welcomed people. I'm not a recent immigrant, but my mother, her parents were immigrants from Germany and had 10 children, and most of the farm people in that area were immigrants from Czechoslovakia or Poland or Germany, and we're very proud of it and have no reason not to be proud of it. Historically, most of the work has been done by immigrants in this country.
I agree.
And yet, while we have a great history of the contributions of immigrants and immigrants' families to our university, to our science, to every part of our culture, it's changed a little bit recently. Tell us about that.
It has. I believe it goes a lot with sentiment. Some people describe it as anti-immigrant sentiment. I describe it as a lot of divisiveness in our political environment right now that really is not educating the common citizens of this country, and instead is confusing people and creating these misnomers, or creating a situation where there's now a creation of what people reflect as anti-immigrant sentiment. When I was in college, I went to Berkeley in the 90s. Back then, at that time, Governor then Wilson had proposed to pass a proposition called Proposition 187 that would require hospitals to report to the immigration officials if someone was didn't have legal status in the country, or to deny them. It was a big legal fight, and it created a lot of divisiveness, and it created a lot of confusion and miseducation on terms of what legal immigration or immigration meant. I see the same effects as what's happening, but now we're talking on a national level, and it's frightening for these communities. It's frightening as Americans to be caught up in this.
We should never forget the contributions that immigrants have made to this country. The immigrants that have become scientists, professors, industrial leaders. Every segment of our society has been blessed with the benefit of immigrants. Why? Because immigrants, people who have the courage to leave another country, take the risks of going to a foreign country with a foreign language and bring their families because of the desire of a better life for their children and grandchildren. These are these are the people I would want here. They make our country greater. They really add, I think, to the genetic makeup of our country. What are your comments on that?
Well, I appreciate that comment because I agree with you. I do believe that there is a great skill set from professionals to people who are just hardworking laborers. I mean, our communities in all over our nation, even here in Wisconsin, our dairy farmers, our rural community businesses, they really utilize the benefit of immigrants, their work. My father, for example, he was an immigrant from Mexico. He was educated, but he was a laborer, hardworking laborer. He worked in the migrant fields. If anybody wants to understand what migrant field work is like, it's very difficult, long hours. You're picking fruit, you're picking vegetables in dead heat of California of 105 degrees, subjecting yourself to pesticides and probably long-term illnesses. But they worked hard. Why? Because they felt that they were going to have a better life for their children. And in my case, for example, our case, we did. And a lot of that work ethic came upon myself and my sisters. And that story is common. It's not just my story, but it's common among many immigrants that live and reside in this country.
And even today, our dairy industry in Wisconsin is at risk. And one of the reasons it's at risk is we have not enough employees willing to work those hours on those conditions for that money, except immigrants. And of course, right now there's a shortage of immigrants because of things that the government is doing.
That is correct. There's been a lot of limitations and a lot of the anti-immigrant sentiment is creating a lot of fears in these communities, are afraid to go to work in fear that there might be some immigration raid going in a small employer to a large employer, depending on where they work. But it's true, it's impacting our businesses. Our businesses and dairy farmers, for example, you just mentioned, do rely on immigrant work. It is very difficult. Quite honestly, I had no idea what was involved with dairy work until our immigrant clients started explaining to us what they did and what level of workload they had. And it's something that's very difficult and hard to do. And, you know, it's not something that the most common American that has been here probably would not want to do that type of work. But the immigrant communities do.
And of course, our industries have signs out, now hiring. Our restaurants have signs out, now hiring. I've even got a sign out, now hiring. And the people willing to do that job are often people who are immigrants or families of immigrants, because third or fourth generation Americans today are more concerned about vacation time benefits and,
Yes.
and things like that. I think the hardest workers we can find are immigrants.
Yes, it's true. You know, the reality is, if you're an immigrant and you are a non-citizen in this country, you feel as though you don't have the choice. You have to work. You have to keep going to survive, because bills need to be paid. They pay their bills. They pay their taxes. They know the importance. And some of these immigrants are business owners. They pay into their taxes. They provide for other families because they employ other people. So it's really important for them to continue working, work through vacations, work through their kids' activities, work through many other sacrifices that they may have to make. But it's really important for them.
We're going to have to take our first break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm George Curtis. It's Your Law is the name of the show, and we have a new guest, Mr. Mark Christopher.
Hi, George.
And Mark's a lawyer, like his wife is, and Mark can tell us about some of the critical legal issues that are going through the court system right now with regard to immigration.
Correct. One of the big issues that's happening right now in the world of immigration is there's a big question: what's going to happen with the dreamers, or those children who have what's termed as DACA, which stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. For those of you who don't know, back in 2012, President Obama, through an executive order, gave temporary 2-year renewable status to those children or those individuals who came into the country as children. Okay, so these are people that have come into the United States when they were under the age of 15. They have committed no serious crimes, and they have obtained a high school diploma or are obtaining a high school diploma. In almost every case, these are people who are U.S. citizens in every way. They've been raised in the United States. They've gone to high school in the United States. Many of them don't even know their home country. However, they don't have any legal immigration status in the United States, nor do they have the ability to get the immigration status. So what President Obama did is he gave them this temporary status, which would simply allow them to obtain a work permit. Since it was initiated back in 2012, approximately 1 million individuals have taken advantage of that program. But right now, there's a lot of anxiety among these individuals because this term, the U.S. Supreme Court is taking up the deferred action for childhood arrivals in determining whether or not President Obama exceeded his executive authority in granting this program to those individuals. We expect a decision this spring. We don't know how it's going to turn out, but whatever decision will come out is going to affect not only nearly 1 million individuals that have taken it, but their families and the businesses, like our business, that hire and rely on these smart, young individuals.
What happens to them if the Supreme Court decides that they do not have that status?
That's the big question that nobody really knows. Ideally, you would hope that Congress would pass some type of law that would protect those individuals. Because remember, these are people right now that for the last 6-7 years are working for our businesses. They're able to continue on with their education. And in many cases, they've started their own businesses. So they're very ingrained in our workforce. And if you're a small business like mine, we rely on these individuals. So we don't know. Ideally, you would hope if it doesn't turn out correctly, Congress would pass a law. But we all know the state of Congress right now and their ability to get important legislation passed.
Well, and I'm not too confident about the state of the Supreme Court right now either.
True.
Maybe people should understand, and I'm among them, the different status that people have in this country. That people who are born here, people who come in with families later, people who marry, people who apply for a certain card, people who apply for citizenship, and those people that live long enough to finally get it.
Right, that's a very good question. In immigration law, we categorize them as non-immigrant visas, there's immigrant visas or status, and then there's citizens, okay? And then there's kind of this other region where it's called deferred action, where they don't really have any status under the law. There's just a temporary, we're going to give you a work permit until we decide what we want to do with you, really, okay? So a person who comes into the United States to visit a friend, go to Disneyland, or maybe work temporarily for a business are given a non-immigrant visa, which has a finite duration on that. Normally it's for a year or 2 years or something to that effect. There's something called an immigrant visa. This is where people seek to come into the United States and remain indefinitely. If you get an immigrant visa and come into the United States, you get something called a green card or lawful permanent resident card. That card allows you to remain in the United States indefinitely, okay? As long as you abide by the rules. You don't commit any certain serious crimes, or you don't abandon your status. But a person who's got a green card can remain here in the United States indefinitely. And then the top tier is someone who is a United States citizen. We in the United States have birthright citizenship. So if you're born in the United States, you are a citizen, and that can never be taken away. The other way is to become a naturalized citizen. So for most people, you have to be a green card holder or permanent resident for a minimum of 5 years. Okay? You cannot have committed certain serious crimes. You have to have paid your taxes, registered for selective service, and then you also have to pass a history exam and an English exam in front of an immigration officer. If you meet all of those requirements, then you can become a U.S. citizen. The process from the time you submit your application to the time that you actually raise your right hand for an oath ceremony is normally about 1 year.
Wow, and there are some people who have been here for 10, 20, 30 years, have attempted to go through the process, the green card stage and so on, that still are not citizens. What are the impediments that have taken them so long?
Well, we're seeing a number of impediments, and they're growing every day. The first is the cost of doing it. To simply file an application for to become a permanent resident, you are looking at a minimum of $1,600 to $1,700 just in fees to the government. And a reputable attorney is probably going to charge anywhere between $3,000 to $5,000 for that service. So there's the practical financial impediments. To become a U.S. citizen, the fee right now is in the mid $700 to do that. The other impediments are sometimes simply travel. The only place that you can take an exam to become a citizen here in Wisconsin is in Milwaukee. So you would have to, many of my clients have to travel 3, 4, 5 hours to get down there to take the exam. Another impediment to becoming a permanent resident or a citizen is the ability to pass the exams, to be able to both read and write English at a level that would satisfy the requirements. So those are some of the more common impediments.
Mark, we're going to have to take our second break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask you a question that might sound political, and I don't care if it is or isn't political, but the climate has changed in terms of how welcome and safe that immigrants can feel in this country. So I want to get you ready for the lob. You
Sure.
can duck it or meet it head on.
Sure, thank you.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Law. We're talking about perhaps the hottest topic, at least in my mind, in the country today, and that is immigration. And our expert here, Mark, is going to tell us a little bit about the change in climate over the last 2 or 4 or 6 years.
Yes. Those of us who represent immigrant populations have seen a dramatic shift, not only with the level of anxiety of our own clients, but the cultural view of immigrants. I think throughout our history, we have seen periods where we have scapegoated groups or individuals unfairly. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. We have a political climate whereby people are saying, why aren't you at the point where you want to be in your life? How come you're not making more money? How come you don't have more free time? How come you can't spend more time with kids? And what they're doing is they're trying to say that the reason that is because other people are preventing you from doing that. And in this case, let's face it, they're pointing towards immigrants. And that's not the case. That's not the reality. That's not the truth. What I see when I meet with my clients is I see people who have taken great risk. They have come from a country whereby their language is different. They come into the United States with absolutely nothing. They come here with a dream of working hard. They're willing to work endless hours in deplorable conditions for the simple fact that they want to be safe and that they want a better life for their children. I think you've indicated this before in the prior segment. I asked myself, isn't that exactly the type of person we would want in the United States? But because they don't have money, but because maybe many of them are not educated, maybe because many of them don't understand our political system, they have a hard time asserting their rights. And in the face of large political organizations, it's hard for them to fight back. So there's this false premise that permeates right now in our political culture, and it's really saddening. But I'm optimistic that that pendulum is going to swing back.
Well, it's not going to change unless people like you and your wife, and for that matter, like me, do some educating. We have to deal with this poisonous prejudice and misinformation that's tried to make citizens dislike, fear, hate, distrust immigrants and feel that immigrants are inferior, when really the reverse is true. It would take some real guts for you and me to go to a different country where we don't know the language, start over and compete with the natives. And yet that's exactly what immigrants to this country are doing.
Right. And I wouldn't even say that they're competing. They're simply taking they're working in the fields in the areas that we need workers, where the native U.S. citizen doesn't want to perform. So they're satisfying a need. I can't tell you how many times I receive a telephone call from an employer who calls me up and they say, Mark, I've got this great employee. My business can't run without him. He's a great manager. He's hardworking. I've never met anybody like this. I need to get him his green card. I need to have him become a permanent resident. And they're surprised that when I meet with them, that there is no avenue available for that individual. And the employer is just lost for words. They never anticipated that there wasn't an avenue for an individual like that to remain in our country.
And that's the history of our country. The growth of our country has been these waves of immigrants who brought so much industry, hard work, and culture. You go through the state of Wisconsin and you've got the area of all of the breweries where the German wave and the Polish wave came through. And I'm from northern Wisconsin where we had a lot of Scandinavians to cut the white pine. And they stayed and they contributed to the culture. And back in Merrill, we've got the Norwegian Lutheran Church and we got the Swedish Northern Church. And a little bit further up toward Fifield, we got the Lithuanian. And what did they bring to this country? They all brought something, and it was hard work.
Right, and we've seen it all throughout our history. All we have to do is examine our history. Where we are is not any different. And I think if we simply look back and we look at our country and how we've evolved, we're simply going through another phase of that.
Well, I think so, but we can't be blinded by negative emotion. We can't get caught up in the political propaganda. We have to understand these are people. We're all immigrants or descendants of immigrants. Even the people who supposedly walked across the peninsula from Russia to this continent were immigrants. And immigrants have brought new blood, new life, new culture, new point of view, and new industry, new industriousness to our nation, and I can't think of any excuse to stomp it out.
Right. And I would ask people just to be curious about their surroundings. Talk to people. You'll find that immigrants are married, they love their children, they love their community, they want to better their community. And I think that they'll find out that there's a lot more that they have in common than they don't have in common.
Oh, I would agree, and of course, we're almost near finished. I want you to make the point that if someone knows an immigrant or is an immigrant or is in love with an immigrant and there's this fear and uncertainty, which there is, they should contact a lawyer.
Absolutely.
Do you know the name of any law firms?
I do. They say knowledge is power. And by reaching out to a reputable immigration attorney, you are going to inform yourself, educate yourself, and release anxieties. We invite them to contact our office, Christopher and De Leon.
And sooner rather than later.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The contribution of immigrants is one of the great reasons why we have a great country. I'm very troubled by the present attitude to demean the immigrant. The immigrant is more likely to work at jobs that we don't want to do, at bad hours, bad distances, paying full taxes, contributing by owning a home, sending kids to school, supporting them, spending money in the community. And they don't, if they're undocumented, even get to use Social Security. They get none of that back. Millions and millions and billions of dollars of contribution and effort and the culture contribution to the richness of our country, and they get so little back. Why would we demean the immigrant?